When you hear the name Rolex, you automatically think of how much this person spent on a watch that just tells time. I mean, your phone can do that now, so why spend $50,000 on a watch? Why, that might sound true, what most people don't realize is that you are buying more than just a watch, you are buying a piece of art, wealth, status, and time. Mercedes and Gucci have achieved a similar status on par with Rolexes. These brands have rooted themselves so deeply into the global culture that they have come to represent much more than the products they label. They symbolize wealth, success, style, and quality. Their cultural prominence has made these companies unfaltering kings of their respective domains. Rolex stands out because of its ability to pinpoint the visionary strategies that put the company on the horological throne. 5 of those strategies stand out and made Rolex what it is today. They are Rolex's technical innovation, marketing finesse, design consistency, financial independence, and selective scarcity. These have generated the company's unrivaled success among other watch brands. But Rolex wasn't just born successful. In 1905, German-born Hans Wilsdorf and his brother-in-law Alfred Davis set up an eponymous company in London that imported Swiss movements. They installed them in British cases and sold them to jewelers who put their own names on the dials. People loved this and market was good. Sensing the potential for their own brand to succeed in the growing wristwatch market, Wilsdorf dreamed up and secured the brand name Rolex in 1908. From the beginning, Wilsdorf understood the appeal of precision timekeeping, and because of that, in 1910, a Rolex became the first wristwatch to carry the Swiss certificate of chronometric precision, bestowed by the official watch rating center in Bienne, Switzerland. Recognizing the positive impact this rating had on sales, Wilsdorf secured a Class A precision certificate from the Kew Observatory in 1914, usually reserved for marine chronometers. This certification resonated with British customers who understood that accurate timekeeping, the solution to the long-standing problem of navigating longitude, had empowered the British Empire to dominate the seas in both combat and commerce. Thus began the convention of offering civilians mechanical accuracy that very few require but many desire. And since then, Rolex has done nothing but offered cutting-edge accuracy. Demand for Rolex watches rose swiftly, but the British taxes on the Swiss mechanics that Rolex used made Wilsdorf relocate the business to Geneva, Switzerland, in 1919. With production costs lowered, Wilsdorf set out to solve the problem of moisture and dust entering the watch case and damaging the movement. The Rolex team came up with a fully sealed watch case, which Wilsdorf dubbed the Oyster, and released it to much fanfare in 1926. During the 1920s, this screwed-together device was so innovative that some consumers, who were accustomed to protecting their watches even from rain, were skeptical about the innovation of the Oyster. It would take some marketing brilliance to convince the general population that the Oyster case was, indeed, waterproof. And that was exactly what Wilsdorf did. Wilsdorf put those doubts to rest by submerging Rolex oysters in aquariums he had set up in the windows of high-traffic department stores such as Harrods in London, and adds broad images of submerged oysters to a much broader international customer base. But it wasn't enough to get the needed results he wanted. Then a stunning breakthrough came in 1927. Wilsdorf made sure that an oyster was on Mercedes Gleitz, who swam the English Channel in over 10 hours, being the first woman to do so, but she wore the watch around her neck rather than her wrist. The watch didn't leak, and that feat made the news by way of another invention from Wilsdorf. An ad he placed in the papers with Gleitz's testimony about the watch's performance, and Wilsdorf would milk it for decades with excellent results. Wilsdorf would repeatedly make sure his watches were on the wrists of some of the bravest people that accomplished some of the most daring feats of the day. Specifically, Wilsdorf understood that when someone sets a record, they're going to make the papers, and setting records was a 20th century obsession. With Rolex's decidedly rugged, adventure-ready timepieces which stood in stark contrast to what most watch brands were producing at the time, Wilsdorf could legitimately equip explorers and daredevils with expedition-ready timepieces. Some of the list of accomplishments that Rolex attached themselves to, and, subsequently, pushed into the public via testimony ads were in 1933, a Rolex flies over Mount Everest at an altitude exceeding 33,000 feet with the first team to do so as part of the Houston expedition. 1935, a Rolex sets the world record for land speed at 276 miles per hour alongside celebrity driver Sir Malcolm Campbell. A few months later, he would break the 300 miles per hour barrier at Bonneville Salt Flats, Utah. 1953, a Rolex accompanies Sir Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay on the first successful summit of Mount Everest. Rolex releases a version of that watch called the Explorer in the same year. 1955, Rolex watches accompany the first commercial intercontinental flights. Rolex then equips Pan American pilots with GMT Masters. 1956, US President Lyndon B. Johnson famously sports a Rolex day date, and Rolex advertises heavily around the ensuing association with world leaders. 1956, the Milgauss is proven to withstand a magnetic field measuring 1000 Gauss at the CERN particle accelerator. Ads announcing this were targeted toward engineers and scientists. 1960, a Rolex deep-sea special descends to the bottom of the Mariana Trench aboard the record-setting submarine Trieste, a feat that made the papers worldwide. 1963, Rolex launches the Cosmograph Daytona, an automotive-specific chronograph, linking the brand interminably with one of the world's most famous motorways. The world's fascination with famous explorers and record-setters began to settle down toward the last quarter of the 20th century. With the race for space slowing down and most corners of the world mapped, the digital age was moving our frontiers into an increasingly virtual realm. Simultaneously, the tools of exploration were becoming digital, leaving mechanical watches to increasingly become anachronistic devices. Rolex shifted gears at this point, focusing on star athlete ambassadors, sporting event sponsorships, particularly tennis, golf, motorsports, and yachting, and Rolex upped its role as a benefactor to art and science. Rolex itself is a watch built on innovation that always pushes the limits of what a watch can do. In 1931, Rolex introduced the first automatic winding wristwatch, giving birth to the legendary Oyster Perpetual. The auto-winding movement was a technical marvel that caught people's attention for its convenience, while decreasing wear on the manual winding mechanism and the crown threads, thus reducing service intervals and improving water resistance. It would be hard to overstate the impact of the auto-winder on the entire mechanical watch industry, and, once again, Rolex was out in front making headlines. Despite Switzerland's neutrality, World War II was challenging for the Swiss watch industry, and technological innovations aimed at the civilian market were few. Many watch companies retooled to focus on war contracts, which demanded simple, rugged watches for ground soldiers and pilots. Being always the eccentric with an eye on the long game, Rolex only supplied a limited number of watches to the British military and marched forward with innovations for the civilian market. In 1945, Rolex released the Datagist. The Datagist was the first watch to have the date jump instantaneously at midnight, rather than taking hours to turn over as in most mechanical wristwatches. Legend has it that the name comes from the date jumping just before midnight. After the war, Rolex was uniquely poised to supply an increasingly affluent civilian market that wanted futuristic products, and the brand found innovations. Rolex secured the patent for the date magnifier, or Cyclops, around 1950, and it appeared for the first time in 1953 on that year's edition of the Datagist. To this day, no watch is as instantly recognizable as a Rolex with a Cyclops and a fluted bezel, making the Datagist, day-date, and Sky-Dweller horological icons. By launching the Cyclops on the Datagist, Wilsdorf literally magnified one modernization with the other, a brilliant marketing move that capitalized on his well-honed instinct for titillating his customers with exclusive introductions. The 1950s were watershed years for Rolex, seeing the release of the Air King, 1958, the Explorer, 1953, the Submariner, 1953, the GMT Master, 1955, the Day Date, 1956, the Electromagnetic Field-Resistant Milgauss, 1956, the Lady Datagist, 1957, and the first Deep-Sea model, 1960. With the exception of the Day Date, which was the first watch to display the weekday and date on the dial, and the GMT Master, which was the first of its kind. Rolex's post-war offerings were highly compelling configurations of pre-existing technologies. Rolex is renowned for making only incremental and conservative changes to their watch designs, and the aesthetics have remained remarkably consistent. One could argue that Rolex's 20th century design set such an enduring aesthetic standard that Rolex simply never needed to change things up. One could also say that, because mechanical wristwatches have been categorically anachronistic for about 5 decades, the unchanged look of Rolex watches has played perfectly into the rising trend toward retro-style timepieces. However, a look at any other watch brand tells us that Rolex's strict adherence to its design legacy is unique among mass producers of watches. Rolex managed to survive the quartz revolution by counting on its brand and reputation. It didn't matter if a mechanical Rolex was less accurate. The amount of effort put into creating and assembling the Rolex, most of which is done by hand, by the way, gives it a collectible value that no mass-produced quartz watch will ever have. The time it takes to produce a single Rolex is over a year, and unlike most companies, Rolex doesn't outsource any of its production. Quality is everything to them, and when you look at some of their recent models, it's hard not to think of them as works of art. Even today, Rolex is the biggest watch producer in Switzerland, and although they account for only 1% of all watch sales across the world, they represent 1/4 of the global market's value. They're the official timekeeper for 2 of the 4 Grand Slams, 2 of the 4 golf majors, the Formula One Championship, and the 24-hour Le Mans race. It's truly impressive how Rolex has managed to stay on top of the luxury industry for over a century. They've become more than just expensive watches. They're a symbol of wealth for both self-entitled rich kids and powerful men alike. What truly sets Wilsdorf apart from so many founders and what sets Rolex apart from so many corporations is that upon Wilsdorf's death in 1960, ownership of Rolex SA, a conglomerate of interlinked sub-companies, passed to the Hans Wilsdorf Foundation, founded by Wilsdorf in 1945, the mission of which is simply to sustain Rolex SA indefinitely. Rolex is uniquely positioned to do nothing more than sustain itself how it sees fit. There is no mandate to grow market share or to increase profits, and certainly, the company's vision looks far afield of the current financial quarter. By setting up his legacy this way, Wilsdorf's esoteric entrepreneurial spirit has outlived him, resulting in 2 business practices that would surely displease quarterly-focused investors, ignoring trends and shorting supply. It's hard to imagine that Rolex could get away with not meeting market demand if they were solely beholden to quarterly profits. Wilsdorf's visionary long game lives on in this practice, which seems to perfectly embody his innovative methods of generating buzz at any cost. Simultaneously, Rolex's commitment to its original design seems to have assured that Rolex watches will never go out of style, even as new materials and technologies slowly make their way into new models. Being eternally in vogue, more than anything has assured that Rolex will remain king for the foreseeable future. So when next you see a Rolex, know that you are not just looking at a watch, you are looking at a piece of art that captures time and innovation. A piece of art that is worth $50,000. We hope you enjoyed this informative video. Don't forget to hit the like button and the bold red subscribe button to subscribe to our channel for more great videos like this one. Thanks so much for watching. See you next time.